Imagine a country where survival is a daily gamble, where your next meal isn't guaranteed, your words could get you arrested, and the person running the show has more secrets than a spy novel. Welcome to Venezuela, a nation that's become a living nightmare under Nicolás Maduro's iron grip. In the next few minutes, we're diving deep into the dark underbelly of a country that's been transformed from a prosperous paradise into a hellscape of human suffering. 8 shocking secrets that the Maduro regime desperately wants to keep hidden. Secrets so brutal, they'll make you question everything you thought you knew about modern politics. Get ready for a journey into the heart of darkness. Number 8. Economic collapse, when money becomes worthless paper. Picture this. You're a Venezuelan parent walking into a store with a backpack full of cash, not because you're rich, but because you need an entire backpack just to buy a loaf of bread. This isn't a dystopian movie. This is everyday life in Venezuela. In 2016, Venezuela's inflation rate hit a mind-blowing 800%. By 2018, it skyrocketed to an unimaginable 1,000,000%. Let that sink in, 1,000,000% inflation. To put that into perspective, if a cup of coffee cost 1,000 bolivars on Monday, by Friday, it would cost 10,000 bolivars. Your entire month's salary could barely buy a handful of eggs. The story begins with Hugo Chávez's socialist revolution and continued under Nicolás Maduro. They promised economic paradise, but delivered an economic apocalypse. Venezuela went from being the richest country in South America to a place where people literally weigh money instead of counting it. Imagine carrying calculators to grocery stores just to do instant math on prices. Imagine watching your life savings evaporate faster than water on hot pavement. One Venezuelan told reporters, "I used to be a middle-class professional. Now I'm selling homemade bread just to feed my family." The root? An economy completely dependent on oil. When global oil prices crashed, Venezuela's entire economic model collapsed. But it wasn't just market forces. It was systematic destruction. Maduro's government printed money like it was confetti, destroying any remaining economic stability. By 2019, the minimum wage was equivalent to less than $5 per month. Not per day, per month. People started measuring economic value in kilograms of food, not currency. Teachers would quit their jobs to become street vendors. Doctors would abandon hospitals to sell arepas on street corners. The human cost is staggering. Malnutrition became widespread. Children started dying from preventable diseases. Hospitals ran out of basic medicines. Over 5 million Venezuelans fled the country, the largest migration crisis in Latin American history. Economic experts call it one of the worst economic collapses in modern world history. Worse than the Great Depression, worse than Zimbabwe's hyperinflation, comparable only to war-torn economies. And at the center of this economic hurricane, Nicolás Maduro, living in luxury while his people starve. This isn't just an economic failure. This is a human tragedy of epic proportions. Number 7. Systematic human rights violations. The silent screams of Venezuela. When we talk about human rights violations, most people imagine distant historical nightmares. But in Venezuela, this nightmare is happening right now, in real time, under the watchful eye of Nicolás Maduro's regime. Imagine a world where speaking out against the government could mean disappearing forever, where your family might never know what happened to you. This isn't fiction. This is the daily reality for thousands of Venezuelans. According to Human Rights Watch and the United Nations, Maduro's government has systematically crushed any form of opposition through a terrifying machinery of repression. The numbers are chilling. Between 2014 and 2020, over 18,000 extrajudicial killings were documented. These weren't casualties of war. These were citizens murdered by their own government. Take the case of Fernando Albán, a local politician who simply criticized the government. In 2018, he was arrested, and hours later, authorities claimed he committed suicide by jumping from a 10th floor building. His family knew the truth. This was a state-sponsored assassination. The government's weapon of choice? The FAS, Fuerzas de Acciones Especiales, a special police unit that operates more like a death squad. They burst into neighborhoods, particularly in poor areas that might oppose Maduro, conducting what locals call Operation Reptile, systematic hunting of political dissenters. Torture isn't just a possibility, it's a systematic strategy. Secret detention centers have been documented where prisoners are subjected to electric shocks, waterboarding, and psychological manipulation. The goal isn't just to silence individuals, but to terrorize entire communities into submission. Women and indigenous communities suffer even more brutally. Rape has been used as a weapon of political intimidation. Indigenous groups fighting for land rights have faced systematic persecution, with entire communities displaced or massacred. The international community has repeatedly condemned these actions. The International Criminal Court is investigating Maduro's regime for crimes against humanity. But condemnation hasn't stopped the violence. What's most terrifying is the normalization of this horror. Venezuelans have become so accustomed to fear that many no longer report disappearances. A culture of silence has been forcibly created, where survival means keeping your head down and your mouth shut. One survivor, speaking anonymously, said, "In Venezuela, your biggest crime can be having an opinion. Your biggest protection is being invisible." This isn't just a human rights crisis. This is a calculated strategy of terror designed to crush the human spirit and maintain absolute control. Number 6. Drug trafficking and narco-state allegations. Venezuela's cocaine superhighway. Picture a country so deeply entrenched in drug trafficking that the government isn't just turning a blind eye, it's actively running the operation. Welcome to Venezuela, the world's most dangerous narco-state. In 2020, the US Department of Justice dropped a bombshell. Nicolás Maduro was indicted on narco-terrorism charges. Not just a low-level politician, but the sitting president of Venezuela was accused of transforming an entire country into a global drug trafficking hub. The numbers are mind-blowing. According to international intelligence reports, Venezuela has become the primary cocaine export route for South American cartels. In 2019, an estimated 250 metric tons of cocaine, nearly 40% of global production, passed through Venezuelan territory. That's enough to fill 25 Olympic-sized swimming pools with pure cocaine. How did this happen? It's a perfect storm of economic collapse, political desperation, and complete moral bankruptcy. With Venezuela's economy in ruins, drug trafficking became a critical source of government income. High-ranking military officials, including members of Maduro's inner circle, were directly involved in drug operations. The Cartel of the Suns, Cartel de los Soles, is the most infamous example. This isn't some shadowy criminal organization. It's literally made up of active-duty Venezuelan military officers. Named for the sun insignia on military uniforms, this cartel operates with direct government protection. Take the case of Maduro's nephews, Efraín Antonio Campo Flores and Francisco Flores de Freitas. In 2015, they were caught in Haiti trying to smuggle 800 kilograms of cocaine into the United States. Their defense? They were working directly for the Venezuelan government. The trafficking routes are ingenious and terrifying. Cocaine moves through Venezuelan ports, gets shipped on government-owned planes, and is protected by military escorts. Venezuelan diplomatic pouches have been used to smuggle drugs, making the entire diplomatic corps potentially complicit. International drug enforcement agencies estimate that drug trafficking now accounts for 30 to 40% of the Venezuelan government's income. This isn't just crime, this is state-sponsored economic survival. The human cost is devastating. Drug trafficking fuels violence, corrupts institutions, and destroys communities. Young people are recruited into cartels, families are torn apart, and an entire generation is trapped in a cycle of violence and addiction. One former Venezuelan military officer who fled the country revealed, "It wasn't a choice anymore. Either you participated in the drug trade, or you didn't eat. The entire system was built on cocaine." Maduro's response to these allegations? Typically defiant. He calls them American propaganda, a conspiracy to destabilize his government. But the evidence keeps mounting. This isn't just a drug trafficking story. This is a tale of a government so desperate, so morally bankrupt, that it turned an entire country into a global drug distribution network. Number 5. Political prisoners and torture, the invisible victims of Maduro's regime. Imagine being arrested for a Facebook post. Imagine being tortured not for a crime, but for having an opinion. Welcome to the dark reality of Venezuela's political prison system. The helicoid is no ordinary prison. Located in Caracas, this spiral-shaped building was once a modern shopping center. Now, it's a symbol of Maduro's terror, a place where political prisoners disappear into a nightmare of systematic torture and psychological destruction. Numbers tell a chilling story. Between 2014 and 2021, over 15,000 political prisoners have been documented by human rights organizations. But the real number? Likely much higher. Many disappearances are never reported, families too terrified to speak out. Take the story of Leopoldo López, one of Venezuela's most prominent political prisoners. A democratic opposition leader, he was arrested in 2014 for organizing peaceful protests. His crime? Challenging Maduro's regime. Kept in isolation for years, he was a symbol of resistance, until he was dramatically released in 2020, only to be placed under house arrest. Torture in Venezuelan prisons isn't just physical, it's a calculated psychological warfare. Prisoners describe methods that would make your skin crawl. Prolonged isolation in pitch-black cells, electrical shocks to sensitive body parts, systematic beatings, denial of medical treatment, psychological manipulation designed to break the human spirit. One former prisoner, speaking anonymously, shared a horrifying account. They would play mind games. Sometimes they'd tell you your family had been arrested. Other times, they'd pretend to prepare you for execution, only to stop at the last moment. The mental torture was worse than physical pain. The Venezuelan Intelligence Service, SEBIN, operates these prisons like personal torture chambers. Their methods are so brutal that even international human rights organizations struggle to document the full extent of their crimes. Military intelligence plays a critical role. Young soldiers are indoctrinated into believing that political prisoners are enemies of the state. They become instruments of a system that dehumanizes anyone who dares to speak out. Women suffer even more brutally. Sexual violence is used as a weapon of political repression. Rape, sexual assault, and forced nudity are documented methods of breaking political prisoners. The psychological impact extends beyond prison walls. Families live in constant fear. Parents don't know if their children will return home. Wives wonder if they'll ever see their husbands again. Children grow up without parents, their lives destroyed by a regime that sees human rights as an inconvenience. International organizations like the UN have condemned these practices, but condemnation means little to a regime that sees torture as a tool of political control. This isn't just about prisoners. This is about breaking the human spirit, crushing hope, and maintaining absolute control through terror. Number 4. Healthcare system collapse. A medical apocalypse. Imagine a hospital where doctors use smartphone flashlights during surgeries because there's no electricity, where medical equipment is so scarce that nurses create makeshift IV drips from plastic bottles. This isn't a scene from a dystopian movie. This is the daily reality of Venezuela's healthcare system. The collapse of Venezuela's medical infrastructure is nothing short of a humanitarian catastrophe. Once considered one of the best healthcare systems in Latin America, it has now become a global symbol of medical desperation. Let's break down the numbers that tell a devastating story. 85% of medical equipment is non-functional. Over 50% of hospitals lack basic medical supplies. More than 20,000 doctors have fled the country since 2013. Infant mortality rates have increased by 1,000% since the economic crisis began. Dr. Miguel Hernandez, a former surgeon who now works as a taxi driver, describes the nightmare. We used to have world-class hospitals. Now, we're performing surgeries with candles, reusing gloves, and watching patients die from preventable diseases. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the total destruction of Venezuela's healthcare system. While the world battled the virus with advanced medical technologies, Venezuelan hospitals became death traps. Patients brought their own cleaning supplies, masks, and even basic medicines. Childhood diseases long thought conquered have returned with a vengeance. Measles, which was nearly eradicated in Venezuela, came roaring back. Malnutrition has weakened immune systems, making children vulnerable to diseases that should be easily treatable. Imagine being a parent, watching your child die from a simple infection that would be treatable with a $5 antibiotic in any other country. This is the daily reality for thousands of Venezuelan families. The medical exodus tells its own tragic story. Between 2013 and 2019, over 22,000 doctors left the country. Those who remain often work multiple jobs just to survive, moonlighting as taxi drivers, street vendors, or leaving medicine entirely. Hospitals have become symbols of decay, Operating rooms with broken equipment, emergency rooms without basic supplies, entire wings shut down due to lack of maintenance. In many hospitals, patients must bring their own medical supplies, from gauze to surgical gloves, from medicines to clean water. Maternal mortality rates have skyrocketed. Venezuela now has one of the highest maternal death rates in the world. Pregnant women face impossible choices: risk giving birth in conditions barely better than medieval times, or attempt dangerous journeys to neighboring countries. This isn't just a healthcare crisis. It's a systematic destruction of a nation's medical infrastructure, deliberately engineered by a regime that prioritizes political control over human life. One nurse summed it up brutally: in Venezuela, getting sick is a death sentence. Number 3. Mass migration and refugee crisis. The largest exodus in Latin American history. Imagine being forced to leave everything behind. Your home, your memories, your entire life, reduced to a backpack and a desperate hope for survival. This isn't a choice. This is the reality for over 6 million Venezuelans who have been forced to flee their homeland. It's the largest migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere's recent history. To put this into perspective, that's more people than the entire population of Paraguay abandoning their country. If this exodus were a city, it would be the second largest in Venezuela, a ghost population of displaced souls. The human stories are heart-wrenching. Entire families walking thousands of miles, crossing dangerous mountain passes, selling everything they own just to escape. Parents carrying children, elderly people with nothing but a few possessions, young professionals leaving behind years of education and dreams. The routes are treacherous. Many migrants walk the highway of death, a grueling journey through the Andes Mountains. Some travel up to 4,000 kilometers on foot, crossing multiple countries. Imagine walking from New York to Los Angeles, but with nothing but the clothes on your back and constant fear of survival. Most refugees end up in neighboring countries. Colombia, 1.8 million Venezuelan refugees. Peru, 1.2 million. Ecuador, 500,000. Chile, 450,000. Brazil, 250,000. These aren't just numbers, they're human beings. Doctors working as street vendors, engineers driving taxis, teachers cleaning houses, an entire generation of professionals scattered across South America, their skills wasted, their dignity stripped away. The economic impact is staggering. Host countries are struggling to absorb millions of refugees. Schools are overwhelmed. Healthcare systems are stretched. Social tensions are rising as local populations feel the pressure of sudden massive immigration. But the human cost is even more devastating. Families torn apart. Children growing up without homes. Entire communities destroyed. One refugee, speaking in a makeshift camp in Colombia, said, "We didn't want to leave. Venezuela was our home, but staying meant watching our children starve." COVID-19 made everything worse. Refugees became even more vulnerable, facing discrimination, lack of health care, and economic collapse. Many found themselves homeless, without access to basic services, in the middle of a global pandemic. This isn't just a migration crisis. This is a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. A testament to how a government can destroy a country so completely that millions would rather risk everything than stay. As one young migrant told reporters, "We are the generation without a country. We are the walking ghosts of Venezuela." Number 2. Corruption and kleptocracy, the billion-dollar theft. Imagine a country so corrupt that its leaders have literally stolen billions while their people starve. Welcome to Venezuela, a kleptocracy where government officials don't just take money, they strip entire national resources like economic vampires. The numbers are beyond comprehension. Experts estimate that between 2013 and 2019, over $300 billion disappeared from Venezuela's national treasury. That's more money than some countries' entire annual GDP stolen by a single political regime. The Maduro family has become the ultimate symbol of this systematic looting. While ordinary Venezuelans fight for a single bag of rice, Maduro's family lives in unimaginable luxury. His wife, Celia Flores, and their sons have been caught with massive secret bank accounts in Europe, hidden properties in Miami, and luxury real estate across the globe. One of the most shocking revelations came from the Bolibourgeoisie, a term describing the new elite that emerged from Chavismo's socialist revolution. These are government officials who became millionaires overnight, using state connections to create personal wealth. Take the case of Diosdado Cabello, considered the second most powerful man in Venezuela. Investigations suggest he's accumulated a personal fortune of over $1.2 billion. His wealth comes from a complex network of shell companies, illegal contracts, and direct theft from state resources. The corruption isn't just about money. It's a systematic destruction of national infrastructure. Government contracts are awarded not based on competence, but on personal loyalty. State-owned companies like PDVSA, once the jewel of Venezuela's economy, have been stripped bare. Military officials play a crucial role in this theft. They control key economic sectors, from food distribution to oil exports. Many have become millionaires by controlling smuggling routes, selling government resources on the black market, and creating elaborate fraud schemes. Cryptocurrency and international banking have become key tools for this massive theft. Maduro's regime has used Bitcoin and other digital currencies to circumvent international sanctions, moving billions outside traditional banking systems. One Venezuelan economist described it perfectly. This isn't corruption. This is organized economic murder. They're not just stealing money, they're stealing an entire country's future. The international community has taken notice. The U.S. Department of Justice has ongoing investigations into multiple Venezuelan officials for money laundering, drug trafficking, and massive corruption schemes. But here's the most terrifying part. This theft is systematic and intentional. It's not a bug in the system, it's the system's primary feature. The goal isn't just personal enrichment, but complete economic control. As one Venezuelan activist put it, they don't just want our money. They want to destroy any possibility of resistance by keeping us poor and hopeless. I'll develop number 1, military repression and internal control, with a narrative approach that reveals the systematic oppression within Venezuela's military system. Number 1, military repression and internal control, the iron fist of Maduro's regime. Imagine a military so deeply integrated into a political system that it's no longer a defender of the nation, but a weapon of oppression. In Venezuela, the military isn't just an institution. It's the primary tool of Nicolás Maduro's absolute control. This isn't a traditional military. It's a political machine designed to crush any hint of resistance. Since taking power, Maduro has transformed the armed forces into a personal loyalty apparatus, where promotion depends not on merit, but on blind allegiance to the regime. The numbers tell a chilling story. Over 2,000 active military officers now hold key government positions. Approximately 40% of government ministries are led by military personnel. An estimated 50,000 military personnel are directly involved in economic control and repression. How did this happen? It's a strategic takeover decades in the making. Hugo Chavez, a former military officer himself, began embedding military ideology into every aspect of Venezuelan governance. Maduro continued and intensified this approach, turning the military into a hybrid political military force. Military units aren't just defending borders. They're controlling food distribution, managing oil resources, running entire economic sectors. They operate checkpoints that function more like internal border controls, monitoring and controlling civilian movement. The FANB, Bolivarian National Armed Forces, has become something terrifyingly unique. They're not just a military, they're a political party with guns. Soldiers are required to participate in political indoctrination, with mandatory political education that promotes the regime's ideology. Protest suppression is their primary internal function. Between 2014 and 2020, military and police forces were responsible for over 18,000 deaths during anti-government protests. These aren't just crowd control incidents, they're systematic massacres designed to terrorize the population. One former military officer who fled the country revealed the internal mechanism. Disobedience means instant elimination. They don't just discharge you, you disappear. Your family is blacklisted, your future is destroyed. The military controls everything from food distribution to internet access. They manage critical infrastructure, run internal intelligence operations, and have become the primary economic managers of the country. Recruitment has become a tool of political control. Young men are essentially forced into military service, not just as a national duty, but as a method of political indoctrination. Those who refuse face severe consequences, from losing university admission to being labeled as traitors. International human rights organizations have documented systematic human rights violations within the military system. Torture, forced disappearances, and extrajudicial killings are not exceptions. They're standard operating procedures. As one human rights investigator put it, "In Venezuela, the military doesn't serve the country serves the military." This isn't just military control. This is a complete militarization of a civilian society, where every aspect of life is potentially monitored, controlled, and crushed by men with guns and political agendas.